How you doing? I'm Shawn Eckles, and today with the Shawn Eckles Show, we are here with Aaron Colbert, Communication Specialist with Duke Energy. And today we would just like to give you some answers to some of your concerns about Lake Norman and the surrounding areas. So if you could you just tell us a little bit about your Marshall Steam Plant?
Certainly. The Marshall Steam Station that Duke Energy operates on the northern side of Lake Norman is a 2,000 megawatt coal-fired power plant, and it's been quite a presence on Lake Norman for many years now. It produces about 2,000 megawatts of electricity from that facility when it's at full power, and that's enough to support 1.6 million homes in this area. So for Duke Energy's power operations, Marshall is one of the workhorses along the Catawba River, and it's also joined by the Allen Steam Station that is also a coal-fired station down on Lake Wylie. But in addition to that, we have a whole bunch of other power plants that help serve customers' needs every day. When you turn on the light switch, they're sort of doing that work for us. But Marshall and Allen are the two that we get a lot of questions about related to issues of water quality and coal ash. So we wanted to offer up some opportunities to be able to talk a little bit more about that.
So you mentioned steam. Is coal ash really affecting Lake Norman?
So the Marshall Steam Plant has steam in the name because when you drive by, you do see steam released, and that is a product of our scrubber, which removes air components like sulfur dioxides and also other types of air emissions. So the scrubber often looks like a white cloud coming out of that very tall smokestack at Marshall. In fact, some school children have even mentioned that they think it makes clouds at Marshall. But in addition to making steam, we also produce energy. And as you make electricity with coal, which is one of the many ways that we produce electricity at Duke Energy, there's also a byproduct called coal ash that results from that. Coal ash has been around for many, many years, many decades in fact, and it's a very well understood material. In fact, there's been a lot of academic study and a lot of study by EPA and other types of regulators who have reviewed what's in it. So it's well understood, and we know that coal ash, for the most part, is very similar compounds to sand and the dirt that's out in your garden. It has mostly things like alumina and silica and also carbon, of course, that makes it dark. In addition to that, about 1% of coal ash contains trace elements. Some people call them heavy metals, but they're really trace elements, which is things like arsenic or selenium or mercury. Those are the kinds of elements that folks are most concerned about and ask us about related to coal ash, but the vast majority of coal ash is just normal elements that you encounter in your day-to-day activities.
So with that said, is the steam really affecting Lake Norman?
Lake Norman remains very well protected from Duke Energy's power plant operations on a lake. So as part of our operations at Marshall, we have very stringent state permits that we have to adhere to. And there's a lot of environmental monitoring that goes into making sure that we're meeting those requirements. So Duke Energy has been monitoring lake water quality in Lake Norman for decades as part of our operations with the Marshall Steam Station. But there's also a lot of other eyes watching Lake Norman's water quality, including state regulators, county officials, and even nonprofit agencies who do ongoing monitoring. So we know from all of those data that water quality in Lake Norman remains safe and well protected relative to Duke Energy's operations. Some of the things we look for would be not only the discharges that go out from our permitted outfall at Marshall's ash basin, we check that water, and we actually do what we call toxicity tests on that water. So we take ash basin water and use very sensitive insects to subject it to that water and see how they perform. And that's an indicator for how that ash basin water would affect the broader environment. And through repeated tests that we do on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, we continue to see the absence of toxicity for that ash basin water. So that's one of the ways that we're able to say with confidence that ash basin operations that are happening as a result of how we produce energy at Marshall is not affecting Lake Norman.
So where could I find some of the results from these tests?
Duke Energy's done a lot of really thorough analysis on a lot of different aspects of the Marshall site, including groundwater, and how that could be impacted by ash basin operations. So we know that groundwater directly underneath the Marshall ash basin has been affected, but we also know, because of the monitoring wells that we have installed at the property, that Marshall neighbors' drinking water remains safe and not affected by plant operations, and we also know from testing in Lake Norman itself that the lake remains well protected. So all of those data are available through North Carolina Division of Environmental Quality, our state regulators, and we also have a lot of that summary information available on our website as well. It's important for us to be transparent for the public and make sure that folks have good information if they're interested on how we're managing coal ash safely and how we plan to permanently close the basin at Marshall and at the rest of our facilities.
I'm not the person that knows all the details of what you're talking about, but does that mean our groundwater is safe?
Yes, that's a great question, and it's a question that we get often. We do know with a high degree of confidence that groundwater for neighbors around the Marshall Steam Station remains well protected and safe. We continue to do ongoing monitoring of the groundwater on plant property, and while there is some limited impact underneath the ash basin itself, we will continue to be able to address that through our permanent closure plans, and we'll also have a specific plan for corrective action steps designed to protect the groundwater on the plant property. But state regulators have done intensive testing of neighbors' drinking water and the wells that they use around the Marshall plant and our other facilities here in North Carolina, and we continue to find no evidence that neighbors' wells have been impacted. And here's how we know. You don't really just have to take our word for it. There are a number of agencies that are looking at these issues as well. Whenever state regulators test their wells, they're really looking for two things. They're looking for high levels of boron and high levels of sulfates, particularly if you see them together. Those tend to be leading indicators that you might have a potential coal ash impact in your drinking water. And we test those wells around the Marshall Steam Station. We don't find high boron or high sulfates. So we feel really confident that neighbors' wells are well protected and they're not at risk. But we also check this in a different way as well. We have about 200 groundwater monitoring wells on plant property at Marshall, and we can tell by sampling all of those which direction the groundwater's headed. We know that groundwater flows down gradient or downhill underground, and that is really toward Lake Norman and not toward the neighbors. So you might say, gosh, how do you know that Lake Norman is safe then? It's because groundwater is such a small quantity that you don't see any impact in the much larger lake. But as I said, as we continue to refine our plans for how to safely close the ash basin, then the ash basin will be closed in a way that protects the environment and the community, and we'll also be able to do long-term monitoring of the groundwater around the site as well.
Is there anything else that you would like to tell us about coal ash?
Well, one of the things that I think is important about talking with others about coal ash is just to give them a sense of really what this material is all about. Coal ash is very similar to the material that you have left over in your fireplace when you have a wood fire, or in your charcoal grill whenever you're grilling out your cheeseburgers on the weekend. This material that I'm holding here is fly ash, and you can see kind of when I shake it around, it moves a lot like sand. So it is the very fine material that comes out of the boiler, and really about 80% of the ash that is created during the electric process is fly ash, and that's the material that is thinner, and it sort of looks like talcum powder or baby powder. The other material is bottom ash, and it is a little bit coarser and thicker, so it fell to the bottom of the boiler. But really, we're in a position now at Marshall and at our other facilities where we will be managing all fly ash and bottom ash in a dry state. It won't be going to the ash basins any longer, and it will be managed in lined landfills. So the process that we're really talking about now is how do we address the coal ash that had been managed in these ash basins for decades. And that was the industry standard practice across the nation, but now we're at the point in time where it's time to close that chapter and remove the water safely from these ash basins and close them. And there's a couple different methods that industries can use to close ash basins. We'll be following approved methods that are approved by the Environmental Protection Agency, and it'll have a lot of public input and a lot of reviews and oversight by state regulators. So for the public, I think it's most important to know that if you're a neighbor in the Lake Norman community, we know with a high level of confidence that your drinking water supplies are safe, your well water remains safe, and we have a lot of eyes that are making sure that that continues to be the case through the time that we permanently close these. You know, a lot of folks around Lake Norman have a combination of wells that state regulators have tested, but also rely on municipal or community well systems. And we also know know that talking with those folks, they're not seeing any concerns related to coal ash. They know their product for you continues to be safe, and they monitor it very routinely. So as we're closing ash basins, we're really focused on doing it in a way that makes sure that the environment and the local community remains well protected, and doing it in a way that reduces disruption for them. So, this is going to be a journey. We've continued to keep the community updated, and we'll do that throughout this process, and really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you today.
Hi, I really need to sell a house. Can I ask you a couple of questions? Can you help me sell my house fast?
Can you promote my house online?
Do you provide signage? Open houses? Help with the closing process? Home inspection? Appraisal advice? Negotiate a bidding war? Competitive commission? Prepare